So
I know.
with regards to that, how have you had to construct the idea of the woman? Or did you already have a theory in place?
Can I just have a short rant on the subject of saying things that nobody should have to say first before we talk about the specific of woman? I mean, God almighty. You know, I have a PhD in maths. I'm the Britain editor of The Economist. Never, ever, 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 ever did I think I would have to explain to people, for example, that men are stronger than women. I mean, seriously. Nobody's bothered to produce an evidence base, you know, specifically for this, because it's damn obvious, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Or that sex isn't a spectrum. God's sake, you know. So the only way that I've managed, you know, I don't think that you should have to define woman or man any way other than Darwin. Now, this is not me in agreement with most of the feminists that I'm generally in agreement with. But I think one of the problems with feminism is that it doesn't read enough about standard mainstream science. Like, most feminists don't know enough about evolutionary biology. They just don't. I mean, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. I forget who said that, but it's about 40 years old, that saying. And nothing about our bodies makes sense, not one thing about them, unless you remember evolution. And Darwin answered what the sexes were. They were reproductive strategies and the developmental pathways towards those reproductive strategies. And there are only two in mammals. End of story. That's what sex means.
And as soon as I started to think about it, I started to think, you know, if... because it had moved beyond this tiny number of people who needed accommodations to being a broad redefinition of what sex was for everybody. Now the activists were saying that literally you are the sex you say you are, and that there is no difference between sex and gender. You know, it's not that we recognize that a trans woman is male, but that person is in some sense a woman. By the way, that's a very sexist idea, but they weren't even saying that. So I started to think, well, what does it mean then to be gay? Like, if you're gay, does that mean that you're attracted to anyone who identifies as the same sex as you? Well, that's both men and women.
Yeah.
You know, what about it? I'm just straight. I'm straight. You know, how can I say that I'm not attracted to a trans man because the trans man is actually a woman? Well, I'm not allowed to say that. Yeah. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought this is breaking quite a lot of things. And then I discovered they were telling children that this was true, like really true, not metaphorical, not an accommodation for a few people, but really, really true. And that large numbers of children were believing it. And that some of those children were going on to have extreme medical interventions.
Yeah.
And I started to meet, you know, young people who had come out the other end of those medical interventions saying they were seriously damaged. And that was the day I decided to write the book.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, just for the benefit of people at home who might not have heard of you or your work, and how you became interested in writing about gender and gender identity?
I was a journalist for a long time, from 2005 at The Economist, and in about 2017, by sheer chance, somebody said to me, why do kids keep coming home and saying that such and such is trans? And I said, I have no idea, but I'll look into it for you. And I did. I ended up writing about it. The reaction was bizarre. It was the first time in my journalistic career that people would tell me I was a Nazi for asking a simple question. I realised that you're not meant to talk about this, but as a journalist, there's nothing you're not meant to talk about, you know, and in particular, you're meant to go towards the questions that are the hardest and the most controversial. And so I just kept thinking about it and kept writing about it. And then when I finally discovered that the consequences of what I call gender identity ideology include that children are being sterilised, and disproportionately gay children are being sterilised, that was the moment when I knew I had to write a book.
I believe that book was Trans When Ideology Meets Reality. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the title when it was published in 2020, and it got great reviews mostly. It did very well in the UK. It was a Times top 10 bestseller. It was listed in several outlets, best books of the year, including The Spectator and The Observer. But I have never been mentioned in the Irish Times or RTE. Was not reviewed there. I have never been interviewed on Irish state media either.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, it's controversial, sure, but it's also that I haven't been interviewed on the BBC either, I should say, and I haven't been on BBC Woman's Hour, for example. So these legacy media organisations have bought into the idea that people who say they are women, that's who women are. So men can be women if men say they're women. And my book says, no, that's not the case. There are two meaningful categories, men and women. And for some people, that's an ideology that's akin to Nazism. So places like RT and the Irish Times just ignore me.
Really, really close to your mouth.
Sorry, in your book you write, there are three American billionaires that shape global trans agenda. One of them is Jennifer Pritzker, then John Stryker and George Soros. You just drop this information and then never elaborate why those three particular individuals do that to us. And as many people, I think, pointed out already to you, that all three of them are Jewish. Do you think it's just a coincidence? Thank you.
So interestingly, they're not all three Jewish. They're not. John Stryker is not Jewish. John Stryker is not Jewish. People have said he's Jewish, but he's not. So that interested me very much. I didn't think about people's religions. I picked 3 examples, and the reason I picked those 3 examples was I picked 1, a trans woman, 1, a gay man, and 1, a man who doesn't really know what his own foundation does, namely George Soros. So the Open Society foundations are run very separately, and the decisions that are made in a very decentralized sort of way, and frankly not very well a lot of the time. That bit of the book got cut a bit, so that got taken out, and you make a good point that I don't explain why I picked those people. I don't mention their religion. So when people started to call me anti-Semitic, I looked back at the book to see where I mentioned the words Jew, Jewish, Jewishness, Judaism. And the only place is early in the book when I talk about the doctor who put Lily Elba on the path to transition, who was Jewish and who was persecuted by the Nazis because of that fact and ended up dying very young after fleeing. So this thing came out that I had picked 3 Jewish billionaires. You're like, oh, wow, that's a coincidence. And then it turned out that one of them wasn't. And then the most hilarious thing was said by the person who started that rumor. And it was, she thought they were Jewish because he sounded Jewish. It's like, oh my goodness, who's the anti-Semite now?
Do you want to come back on that?
Well, I checked this before asking this question because I didn't want to embarrass myself, and I found sources like Israeli Times that say that John Stryker is ethnically Jewish, so Jewish roots. So,
one of his grandparents was a missionary to China, a Christian missionary.
Maybe.
I didn't bother finding any of this out because I don't care what religion people are.
It's not about religion, not because
I actually
Jewish
think
people are ethnically religious group. Some people are not Jewish people are not religious, so they just identify as Jewish because it's their
so I
ethnicity.
think that that was a good example of something. There was a big booby trap. I knew that the paedophile thing was going to be a big booby trap, and I wrote it so carefully that nobody picked up on. Nobody said, "Aha, you're saying trans people are paedophiles." But this one, it didn't even occur to me. It just didn't occur to me to question what religion people were. And then, people come back, and I actually think they thought, she's talking about a shadowy conspiracy of billionaires, which I wasn't. So that wasn't an exact quote from my book that you gave there, by the way. And I think they're the ones who jumped to saying that I was saying something about Jewish people. I should say a friend of mine who's a rabbi who reaches out to me every time this kicks off again. And one time it was really bad, like they were really going after her. She's really anti-Semitic. And he WhatsApped me and he said, just to remind you, I know many anti-Semites. And you're my favourite.
I have never heard of any Jew fussing about any communist coming to speak. The only time they fuss is when an anti-communist comes to speak.
It feels like this is happening every day.